Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Co-Treat. I'm Jonathan, your occupational professional today.
And I'm Magnolia, your speech therapy practitioner for today.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have to read the script.
I was like, why did you put practitioner?
Well, I say practitioner sometimes.
But you put professional for you, and then... Okay, anyway, I'm Magnolia, your speech therapy professional today, who's trying to read the script.
We have a little... Listen, it's just a little thing to kind of get us going and kind of guide us through the... It's like an outline.
Yeah.
And I just put our little intro in here just to have it.
Look, I'm just reading it. Just read it.
You don't have... I mean, you don't have to. You don't
all
have...
scripted by Jonathan.
All scripted. Everything that we do. It's all...
I'm just kidding. It's not.
Thought out. Can you imagine if this is our scripted content? Oh my gracious.
And we're not great.
No, we're awful. Like, it'd be terrible. So today, what are we going to chat about?
We are going to chat about neurodiversity affirming care and neurodiversity. Yeah. It's like a buzzword right now.
It really is. It's a big topic that you hear a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you hear a lot about it everywhere. Mm-hmm. At least we do in the therapy world. Like, it's huge in the therapy world. It's big in the like medical world in general.
It's huge on my social media. Like, a lot of the people I follow that are like in the therapy world, or just kind of people who are neurodivergent, like, they're all over my social media. So that's kind of where I see a lot of content.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this needs to be talked about.
Yeah. I think there's also like some pushes for like understanding neurodiversity, understanding neurodivergence within like the world, like within the educational world, within, all of these professions that are catered towards helping the population, like serving people. It's important to like be aware of. And also there's been I've seen people that are, doing work to like create awareness and understanding of neurodivergence within even like law enforcement, and like first responders and things like that. So like when people come in contact with people who are neurodivergent, they're better equipped to like understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And understand how to help someone that may be experiencing the world differently than how you are. And so
a lot of people need to learn
absolutely
about this topic. And there is also a move right now. I feel like a lot of people are learning about neurodiversity and neurodivergent, and like they're realizing like, oh, I may be neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And learning more about themselves so that they can get the resources they need or just help better understand themselves and their identity.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool.
I think so too. I find, okay, so before we go too much farther, we need to like do some definitions so that everybody's kind of on the same page and like we have an understanding of what we're talking about.
Right.
So neurodiversity, if we are talking about neurodiversity, just the concept of neurodiversity is this idea that people are different. Like different people have different brains. Our brains function differently, and there's a whole range of different of like how brains function. In the same way that like there's racial diversity, there's cultural diversity. It's just this idea that like all people are not the same.
Right.
And often what we hear it associated with is like neurodivergence and neurodivergent people. And so that's describing people whose brains function differently than the majority.
Right.
So, for instance, oftentimes when we talk about like neurodivergence, people are talking about autistic people with ADHD, people with like learning disabilities, what are considered learning disabilities like dyslexia or dyscalculia, or those kinds of things. Sometimes Tourette's syndrome, those kinds of neurodevelopmental kind of neurocognitive differences are often what people are talking about when they're talking about neurodivergence. Yeah. Because those are people who their brains function similarly, and there's some like patterns to it that, we can create a diagnosis to better understand that. And kind of group them in that together.
Right.
because their brains work similarly, but it's different than the majority of people.
Right.
And so that's kind of like what that neurodivergence is talking about.
Mm-hmm. So when we use the term like neurodivergent, that's a person who is in that neurodiversity, umbrella that we're talking about. Someone who thinks and perceives like the world differently, their brain functions differently. That's what we could use the term, oh, that person is neurodivergent, or I'm neurodivergent. So somebody might use that term to identify themselves. Often too, it might be because they use that term instead of just saying, hey, I'm autistic, because there also is other stuff going on too. So it may just be something that I identify with is like, oh, I'm neurodivergent. Like my brain works differently, whether it's I'm autistic and have ADHD and like have all these other things that make my brain work differently versus, just, hey, I'm autistic. Like some people just kind of identify themselves with this term. So I think that's kind of important to understand. But it just, people have different forms of like neurological ability, like you said, that's different from the majority. And so one term that I didn't realize a lot of people were using, though, is neuromajority, which is a person who isn't neurodivergent.
They're a part of the neuromajority?
Yeah.
Neuromajority?
Majority.
That's hard.
Majority.
That's a hard word to say.
Yeah. So I think that term's kind of important to know as well.
Yeah.
I like these terms, though, because they're easy to understand, like the definition, pretty much.
I agree.
So we've got neuro, which we're just talking about brain.
Yeah.
And then diversity would be like the differences, and then majority, most people.
Yeah. And often, like, along with that neuromajority, you hear a lot of neurotypical, like the term neurotypical a lot. And it's kind of the antithesis, if you will, of like, if neurodivergence means that your brain works and functions differently than the majority, then neurotypical is just a description that your brain works similarly to the majority.
And I think the word typical might have a little bit of like, I don't know, a little, it's not as nice.
To it?
Yeah. Yeah, because like typical kind of has that understanding, like underlying,
this is
like
normal.
This is normal, or this is how it should be.
Okay.
And so I think that's why they've kind of moving a little bit towards neuromajority, because like,
so are we phasing out neurotypical? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not that it's not that saying that like, oh yeah, my brain is different than what it should be. It's just different than what the majority is.
Right.
That's how I'm understanding it. Because neurotypical to me sounds more of like, hey, there's this one golden standard.
Sure.
And anyone who is not in that golden standard is neurodivergent. But this is like saying we've got neuromajority and then neurodivergence.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, my brain just always... Okay, see, I'm learning new things here. Because in my... Like, the way that I understand, like, neurotypical, especially from, like, a pediatric standpoint, we talk a lot about typical development. And so... Because it is a process. And so... That's kind of what my brain goes to, is like development. Are there differences in development? Absolutely. But is there a pretty well-documented kind of progressional series? Also, yes. That's why we have like norms. That's why we have developmental milestones. That's why we have this understanding of what development looks like. And so when I think of, that's just kind of how my brain, like it compares the two of like, but it's not saying that one is better than the other.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
it does.
My brain doesn't hold a... It's interesting that's the shift. I'll have to, be more mindful.
Yeah.
Because in my brain, it does not have a connotation. But I can totally understand what you're saying about how it definitely could. Yeah.
And it's just important to make sure that we kind of look for those underlying ways that we're using our words, because it's really important. Like, this is what you may be labeling a group as, or labeling an individual as. So our words matter.
Yeah,
we know that
words definitely do matter, and it's tricky too. I mean, that's a whole bigger conversation about like labels and stuff. And kind of traversing the world of labels is tricky because sometimes functionally, like just kind of in a practical sense, labels are important because people need to have a group and a community to identify with, to have power, to be able to like make change and make differences and make like have these kinds of neurodiversity affirming movements, you have to have some label to like this be your umbrella and this be your banner that you're going to stand behind. Because for instance, like what I learned in preparation for this is that neurodiversity was actually a term coined by an Australian sociologist in the 90s as a way to bring awareness of the diverse ways that people's brains function, and as a way to like advocate for inclusivity, like inclusion and acceptance.
Yeah.
And so like that's really cool. So labels are tough because
they are.
In some ways it's like we need them. Like just from a practical sense of like I need them so that I can advocate for, you know, like whatever my needs are, advocate for my rights, advocate for my needs, advocate for my supports, advocate against other things. But then also like it's tricky because I, as a clinician, don't have to be very conscious of not accidentally mislabeling someone or like doing any sort of harm by putting someone in a box.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that's where there's kind of like a fine line with talking about neurodiversity. And we talked about this while we were preparing, but neurodiversity, like using that term is amazing because you're like, oh yeah, there's diverse people with different neurological abilities. Like, I love that term. But where like the fine line is if you start grouping them into one group.
Yeah.
Saying, oh yeah, that's like, you have all your neurodivergence over here.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point of neurodiversity is they're all different.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be the same. So you can't like say,
and like
here's stereotypes for the neurodivergent community. Like, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Because they're all going to have different strengths, different abilities. They're going to need different accommodations. They're going to perceive the world differently. Like, that's kind of the point of the movement.
Yeah.
And is to respect that and to see those strengths, which we've talked a lot about in strengths-based approach already in that episode. Yeah. So if you haven't listened to that, you should. We
talk about it a lot.
We do in like every episode. We mention
truly.
That.
And it's so, because it is important. And like it is the like shift, and it's very much where our brains are like pushing for, and we are big proponents of this kind of strengths-based like push and like recognizing everyone's unique abilities and everyone's unique strengths, and like recognizing that all people are valuable and that all people have something to offer to the people around them, to their community, to themselves. Like, and so this is just, I mean, honestly, it feels like an extension of that in a lot of ways, where it's like we're just now it's just a push to like understand the strengths and abilities of all people, like in conjunction with how like there may be differences in brain function and processing, and you know. Yeah, absolutely. So,
but it also shouldn't take away from the fact that some people who are neurodiverse have like extreme difficulties in the world, so it shouldn't take away from that lot. Because like using the term neurodiversity includes more people, because more people can kind of get in the group, because so many people have, you know, diverse use of their brains, diverse neuroanatomy, diverse ways of going through life. But we also don't want to take away from the fact of our friends who have significant struggles. If that makes sense. Yeah, we mentioned that earlier.
We did. We talked a little bit about it. So let's talk about, before we like get into more of that, because I want to circle back to that. Okay. But let's talk a little bit about like what is the context of like, why do we even need a neurodiversity affirming movement? Like what's the historical, how are people treated previously? And like to make this kind of shift to like recognize people's differences and like be inclusive. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah. So do you have anything do you want me to go with it? Because I have a thought process.
You have a thought process? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead and start off some of your thought process.
Okay. So like traditionally, I mean, similar to what we talked about in like the strengths-based approach, the medical model, it is a model that permeates all of medicine. Right. And like we said then, it's like it's not inherently evil or bad. It just is different. And so traditionally, like people with different diagnoses that would now be considered under this neurodiverse umbrella or this neurodivergent umbrella, because neurodiverse is even the neuromajority is neurodiverse.
Right.
So like falling under this neurodivergent umbrella, it views things like autism, and the medical model views things as autism and ADHD and dyslexia and Tourette's and all of these. What is that one? I can't remember what it is, but there's a the condition in which like people see sound.
Oh yeah.
What is it called? It's like synesthesia or something.
It sounded good.
And it's not. That's totally not right. But those kinds of things where there's like neuro differences,
right?
They were treated as like pathology, and so it's like these are things, they're different and they're bad, and we have to fix. It's a problem. We have to fix the problem. So it's looking at these differences and viewing them through a lens of like, these are symptomatic. This is inherently bad. This is like something, this is inherently broken. And this is something that we need to fix.
Right.
And so what that led to was a lot of people in the world having a lot of struggles because they're held to an expectation that they ought to be behaving, functioning, engaging in a way that their brain is not capable of doing because their brain is different.
Right.
And like the more and more research that we have on things like autism, I know autism is the big one, right? There's a ton of research into autism. And there's a lot of buzz around autism, but the more and more research that we have learning about these different neurodivergent populations, the more we're actually realizing that like sorry, Ajax just did something that made a gigantically loud noise. But the more we learn, we like realize that like their neuroanatomy is different. So the structures of the brain are different. There are some structures that tend to be a little bigger. There are some structures that tend to be a little smaller. It's still very much an ongoing process. There seems to be like some areas of the brain that fire differently than others. And so it's like, this isn't just, I've heard people be like, well, it's just all in their head. And I'm like, well, kinda, and that's the point. It's like it's in their brain. Like their brain is different.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Everybody is different. Like we all look different.
Yeah.
We have different anatomical structures, different shapes, sizes, like all this stuff. The brain is different too. That's how it works.
Right. And so it's like these aren't things. It's like expecting. A lot of times it's like expecting a person who doesn't have, this may be a little bit of an extreme comparison, but like it's like expecting someone who doesn't have legs to walk the same way that someone who does have legs would.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like it's not possible. You just can't. Their brain is different. Your strengths and your access to like function is just different. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's worse. It doesn't mean, that's not to say that someone who doesn't have legs is any less of a person than someone who does. In the same way that someone whose brain can't tolerate a super busy, crowded space is any less of a person than someone whose brain thrives in that environment.
Right. So like, and historically the world has been made for the neuromajority.
Yeah. Well, in a lot of ways, and this is just true in general, when you are a minority, you function in a world that was not created largely by people like you.
Yeah.
And and because of that, I literally saw a thing that was talking about how there's a lot of mental health challenges within the world, within the neurodivergent populations. But the challenges do not come from being neurodivergent. The challenges come from existing in a world not supportive of neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it's like you having autism does not mean that you're going to have anxiety, because having autism is not necessarily inherently stressful.
Right.
But what is stressful is being autistic in an environment created by non-autistic people, allistic people, if you will. And it's not designed for you to be successful.
Right.
You know, because it's designed for a different way of brain function.
Yeah. So to give like a visual on that, and I have a little kid, so I watch lots of kid movies over and over again. But Elemental, the movie, you know what I'm talking about?
Love.
Yeah.
Disney movie?
Yeah, the Disney movie. You know, the Fire family.
Yeah.
Like, I love like the illustration that movie has of like that, you know, world was not made for like the fire people. Like, Ember, I think is her name.
Maybe. That's right.
Ember, I think. Because she's like fire.
Yeah.
So picture like a little flame of fire walking around.
Yeah.
And there's like water falling down. She's next to like dry trees. Like, there's all kinds of issues to where like she can't get around town comfortably. Yeah. And like there's barriers in her way of participating. Yeah. And like that's kind of like a good visual, I think, for like how it could be. Yeah. For neurodivergent individuals. Or just like you said, minorities in general. Because I think that movie's a representation of any minority trying to participate in society. For sure. That's not made for them. Yeah. Like, was not structured for anyone different than the majority. Yeah. And so I like that illustration in my head. Yeah. I hope it helps some people kind of understand what we're talking about.
I totally agree. Because it's true. I mean, and like you said, it's a common factor. I can speak from like, for me, I can speak on being a minority as a gay person in the South. And like that, I heard another person talk one time and they were like, being gay is not hard. What's hard is being gay in a straight world. And it's the expectations placed on you by the straight community or like the super conservative community. And like that is hard. Right. But being gay is not hard. And I'm like, that, like, totally relate to that. So in this, I assume that it's a very similar circumstance where like the world just, it's the expectations placed on you that you don't fit into the mold that is like trying to be placed upon you. The world around you is not designed to suit you. And like, I get that on a very personal level. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense just because I do understand what that's like to be that minority group but mine it's a different context. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does.
So, and I'm not trying to equate being gay with being neurodivergent. That's not what I'm saying.
But we're talking about minorities as a whole here. Right. Trying to participate in their environment to kind of give that illustration. Yeah. And I think that helps connect to other people's brains who hopefully are listening. Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, that makes more sense now. Yeah.
And similarly, I mean, like, I'm sure it's similar for people who are like, if you're the only woman in a company with men. Yeah. Right. Or vice versa. Yeah. You know, I'm sure that it's just that kind of perspective of like being the minority in a larger group.
Yeah. Like being an immigrant coming to a city in the United States. Like, I'm sure that has its own challenges as well. I don't want to speak for them, but you know, you're coming into a world that is not like the one you're in. Yeah. And
it's not like curated for your optimal engagement. Right. You know?
And so that's kind of where this movement comes in place, I think, if we're going to kind of shift back to the movement of seeing those difficulties and being like, well, the world should be more accepting. Like, we can be better. Yeah. Be more accepting towards individuals. Yeah. Notice that there's differences, but that they also have strengths. They also can participate really well in the environment. There's just, I don't know. I have a comedian, I showed you the video before. One of my favorite things that he said was like, you know, if we were all autistic, the trains would run on time. And I'm like, that does give into the stereotypes. Like, I get that. But that's still funny. Like, yes, it points out that there are strengths, like, of many autistic individuals, many neurodivergent individuals. Yeah. That if they ran the world, it could be great.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
For everyone.
Yeah. there are so many of the kiddos that we work with who like they go through, it's really just like such a privilege and like so fun to watch them experience the world. It's fun to watch kids in general experience the world.
Right.
But it's really interesting to like see, I guess it's interesting for me because I'm not a person who's autistic and I don't have Tourette's and I don't have these, I'm not a part of that community, and so it's interesting to see our kiddos that we work with like traverse life because sometimes they do like the way that they handle the situation or the way that they go about this particular, engage with this toy or like interact and figure out how to solve this problem
right.
is so different than how my brain would do it. But I'm like, it's totally awesome.
Right.
Like it's just different than how my brain would perceive it. And so that is really cool to experience that.
Yeah.
And it's really neat to watch kiddos figure out the things that work for them and kind of adapt to the environment in a way that suits them, in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, that's exactly where my brain was going. I was literally about to say something about adapting. And I think that's super cool how, autistic individuals, neurodivergent individuals, they've developed ways to adapt to the environment, whether it's stimming or finding their sensory needs and using those. Like, I think that's super cool.
Yeah.
That they have adapted to that. They figure out a way to get the input they need.
Yeah.
To get through the world that's not made for them. And so I think that's one of the points of like, it's our job to be like accepting of that fact.
Yeah.
Like, what does it hurt you if someone stims next to you?
Truly.
And can you explain stimming for anyone who doesn't know?
So stimming is something that you often hear about in the world of autism. And stimming is really just kind of shorthand for self-stimulating behavior.
Yeah.
And so often it's what you think of the repetitive behaviors that people talk about in autism. So oftentimes it's things like jumping up and down, swaying, flapping hands. But it looks so different for different people.
Yeah.
Not all autistic people stim.
Right.
Not all people who do stim are autistic.
Right.
I'm currently bouncing my leg.
And
up
I'm
and down.
fidgeting my fingers. So like we're both using regulatory
Right.
strategies right now.
Right. And so like for most, self-stimulating behaviors or stimming is nowadays often thought of as a way for an individual to receive sensory input to support their like neurocognitive function by stimulating certain areas of the brain or by soothing other parts of the brain. And so oftentimes there's some people will talk about like it's self-regulating behavior rather than stimming behavior.
Right.
And so, but really it's just that's really just the notion of it.
Yeah.
Is it's some sort of a movement or a pattern or a behavior that excites or soothes the nervous system. And it's things that are developed naturally within the person.
Which I think is really cool. Like,
Yeah.
that these things adapt naturally. Like,
Yeah.
no one's like tells
No one taught
the
them to do
individual,
this.
hey, you're gonna feel better if you move your hand like this, or if you put your hand in front of your face, this is gonna make you feel better.
Yeah.
I think that's super cool
It is
that
very
they're
interesting.
able to find that own like regulating behavior within themselves.
Yeah. And it's different and it happens at different times. Like we had a friend once upon a time who he stemmed the most when he was excited.
Yeah.
When he was having a good time, I knew I was like on the right track with like making the experience really fun and exciting. when he's like really started stimming.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes people associate it, and the reason I bring that up is because oftentimes it's associated with like people in a heightened emotional state, but kind of in, they're in frustration or anger or agitation in some way.
Yeah.
But for my friend, like it really came out when we were playing a game.
Yeah.
When he was winning the game.
Are we thinking about the same friend?
Probably.
Okay, yeah. Because
it's our very good friend that we worked with.
Anytime that friend would like get an answer right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And this friend, like when I did his language assessment, he was scoring like so high, like up to like age 21 vocabulary.
And when he was like 11?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, this was insane.
Yeah.
And it was just so funny because anytime he got one right, he would stim. And he was just the happiest.
And, yeah. It was, I miss that friend. I miss that friend a lot. I think about him often.
Yeah.
But
it is a perfect example of, he did that, but it wasn't a bad thing. It did not hurt us.
Nope.
If anything, it just helped him, one, regulate that he was really excited. So he's able to regulate back to the activity. And two, he's communicating that he's happy.
Yeah. And for him, it did not impede his function at all.
No.
There is some discussion within. So the neurodiversity affirming movement has some things that are a little controversial.
Right.
Because, for instance, we were talking about stimming. Like, nowadays, part of the neurodiversity affirming movement is like letting people stim.
Right.
Once upon a time, that was something that was attempted to cancel.
Right. Like there were goals written for
stopping.
We'll stim only like 2 times during a session.
It's called extinction.
Yeah.
Like making this behavior extinct.
Right.
By like eliminating it. For no other reason than the fact that it's just not what quote unquote normal people do.
Right. For social preferences.
Yes. It's going to make other people uncomfortable.
Right.
If you're out here stimming. And so nowadays with this movement of being like, no, all people are different. This is just how this person's brain works. This is what helps them. This is what's functional for them. So like, what does it matter? It doesn't. And the world needs to be more understanding.
Right.
I forgot where I was going.
You were going with, I'm thinking when we would
work. Okay. Yeah. So some controversial things is like, well, there are some self-stimulating behaviors that are harmful.
Right.
That they do damage to the person, whereas there are some people who they hit themselves.
They bite.
Yeah. They bite they're like themselves, like it's not typically thought of as when you're doing it to other people. That's not typically.
No. I was thinking like biting themselves,
right.
Hitting their head on a wall, things like that.
And so, and in those situations, like it's not safe.
Right.
Like the person is actually causing damage to their own body. And that's when it gets hard because it's like, I want to be affirming and I want to be accepting of what you need. But I also don't want you to hurt yourself. Yeah. And like, I can't let you do, like, I can't have that happen, like it's my job to.
That's where it becomes the case of like, how can we help communicate your needs during those moments? And how can we help give you the sensory input you need during the moments in a safe way? Right.
So oftentimes the strategies are like, oftentimes it's redirection, oftentimes it's anticipating the like triggers if these, because if these are things that are triggered through these heightened states of emotion, and then like anticipating those triggers and adjusting the environment, adapting the experience, whatever it is, to kind of limit that. But then there is, it's just tricky, and there's differing levels of support, like evidentiary support for like strategies that are successful. It's just tough.
It is.
Those are the things that are tough.
But it is important that you brought that up because we don't want to discredit that there are some stimming that's unsafe to individuals. Yeah. But I still think it's important for us to respect those. And I think the neurodiversity affirming is like, okay, we respect that, but how can we help?
For sure.
How can we support?
Right. And like it's never going to be a situation of like, you just need to stop.
Right.
Like you need to cut that out. It's never going to be that. It's always going to be, okay, I am hearing, like, I'm listening to your communication. What can I do to help?
Yeah.
You know, how can I give you something that's going to be a little bit, it's going to get have the same effect without the potential harm.
Yeah. And what you're saying earlier kind of reminded me of what we talked about during the speech episode. Because we talked about how some people have stopped stimming just to make other people comfortable. And we did talk about it in the speech episode. Sometimes people do want assistance, reducing their stimming or increasing communication strategies so that they can make others more comfortable around them to feel more confident and empowered. But that's up to the individual.
Yes.
So, you know, that also is another instance where we may work on things.
Sure. That's totally fair.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring that up. So I think stimming is one of the myths that we've kind of busted, I guess. Like, it's not something that has to be gone to be a part of, you know, the environment. In a speech world, eye contact was a big one.
And it wasn't just the speech world.
I didn't know if it was y'all's world too.
I think it was everybody's world.
Everybody's world, yeah. That's true.
Unfortunate.
I've heard, ABA and stuff has worked on eye contact. I've seen videos of that before. But yeah, eye contact, I mean, it's just not necessary.
Yeah.
You can live through the world without it.
Yeah.
So neurodivergent affirming, that's like one practical case I know, moving away from forcing eye contact,
jumping away. And the reason why is because we've learned from people who are part of these neurodivergent populations, specifically with eye contact is often autism. But some people describe it as like physically painful. They're like, it burns my eyes to look at you in your face.
Yeah.
And do I understand why that is? I honestly have no clue.
Right.
Like, I could not tell you why it burns someone's eyes to look at someone else's eyes. But I don't have to know why to know that that's not something that I need, and they don't have to be functional.
Yeah. And I've heard that some individuals have described it as like they're able to find their words better when not making eye contact. Like, when forcing that social demand on an individual, it makes it harder to do other things.
Yeah.
You know, we're putting too much demand.
Yeah. I mean, and you can imagine, like, people, I think that people would understand this kind of concept, what you're talking about, because even right now, when I'm like thinking and trying to collect my thoughts, I'm not looking at you.
No.
Like, as I'm thinking and considering, I'm looking into space.
Yeah.
And then when I have my thoughts collected, then I'll kind of look back at you.
Yeah.
And so that's also just kind of a demonstration of like, it is not an uncommon thing for people to not stare at people's faces when they are communicating or engaging in life. That's not an uncommon thing. You probably do it too.
Right.
But someone whose brain works differently may never look at someone's face.
Yeah.
But do they need to?
Right.
Is it actually impeding function at all?
Right. Absolutely not.
No.
So what are some other neuromajority things we can think of that gets placed on neurodivergent?
Well, a lot of the things that come to my brain are a lot of like sensory differences. Oftentimes people whose brain functions differently, there's a lot of sensory, the way that sensory processing happens in the brain is different. So for instance, I have many children who operate better, they function better, and me as well, function better in quieter spaces. Because their threshold for like sensory input is lower. So they need less input to receive the same amount of stimulation. And so it becomes very overwhelming.
Right.
When, like, I have some kids who, like, and this is like, people know this from their own lives too. Like, there are moments when you get overwhelmed. For some people, it just happens kind of more often because their brain just functions differently. And so, like, I have several people who work with several kids who they prefer to work in our, like, I call it our blue room, and it just has blue, like,
light covers.
Blue light covers, and so it's dimmer, it's calmer, it's away from the busier spaces in the facility. It's a more relaxed environment.
Yeah.
And so they're more engaged, they're more talkative, they seem less distressed, you know? But then when you go into like a larger space, and this is one thing that gets tricky, is like, some people will say like, oh, well, they really love it in the super busy gym. And they really love being around all these other people, and they really love like this open space and stuff, because what they see is this kiddo running at full speed. They see them like on the go. They're zipping between things. They're jumping from...
They got the zoomies.
You know, they're like jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing. And they're... And you can imagine it as like their brain is just like on overload, because there's all this stimulation around. Their brain is just on overload, and they're just going, which in some contexts, totally fine. You know, not a big deal at all. You know, absolutely. Go have your moment, go run around, play, do your thing. But the struggle comes when that same friend is then expected to follow some sort of structured routine, or follow some sort of structured like activity, or there's a need to like shift or transition to new or alternative activities or spaces or whatever, and that becomes very challenging. It can become very challenging because their brain has wired up so much, like their brain is on overdrive. And so in that space, yes, they're going, but is it the space that they're going to be the most practical and functional? So what that could look like in real life is, does it make the most sense for your kid during an activity when they need to follow a structured routine, or when it is most helpful to follow a structured routine, like bath time, for instance, if you know that this child operates better in a calmer space, then it's a good idea to curate a quieter, dimmer, calmer space during bath time, so that they can be the most functional, rather than having music blaring, you know, because some people like to listen to music while they're taking showers. Maybe you don't want to have a lot of music. Maybe you don't want to have light up toys in the bath. Maybe you don't want to have, you know, a lot of like, maybe you want to fill up the bathtub before they get in there, because the sound of the rushing faucet could be a lot of stimulation, you know. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like in these kinds of functional moments, this kiddo may be better supported with those sensory adaptations versus like if you're just going to play at the park, sure, you know, like go run wild and like do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So, and that's not me. I don't know. I hope that doesn't come across as me being like, it's not okay for them to be super excited. Like, and when I say excited, I mean like their brain be super excitable.
No, it makes sense, because we're talking about like how we can better understand neurodivergence and how, like, you know, we can help these individuals.
And making the adaptations so that the world makes the most sense.
Yes.
When it needs to.
And so it's important that we all go with the understanding of some neurodivergent individuals may have sensory differences that we need to be aware of. And
that's common not just in autism. Yes. It's often associated with autism. But again, it's true that not all autistic people have sensory differences. And not all people who have sensory differences are autistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very prominent in the world of ADHD. It's also very prominent in the world of like mental health. Yeah. People with OCD or with anxiety or, you know, different phobias and stuff. Yeah. They are also tend to be more susceptible to, they have different sensory needs.
Yeah, but the neurodivergent affirming movement would be seeing those needs and changing, if we can, adapt the environment how we can, adapt an individual schedule how we can, so that they can best participate in their environments. Another instance that I can think of is like pragmatics. I mean, eye contact has always been considered part of pragmatics as well in the speech world. Other things that like is part of the neuromajority pragmatic skills that we like to put on neurodivergent individuals is like turn taking in conversation, staying on a non-preferred topic during conversation, not oversharing.
Yeah.
The appropriateness of topics, things like that. Those are all things that are important.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to take in consideration that our neurodivergent friends may have difficulty with those things. And that's not always a bad thing because they don't have to fit that one uniform mold.
Right.
That's neuromajority, like pragmatic skills.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where I see this big movement too. It's like we shouldn't push for kiddos to take 2 turns in conversation or only stay on the topic of your friends or don't talk too much about trains or don't talk too much about rocks. Don't talk too much about dinosaurs, whatever their special interest is. Yeah. Don't talk too much about it. Like, that has often been something that's been like put on neurodivergent friends. And that's a big push away from that too.
Right. I'm pretty sure I've seen like goals in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that I remember seeing goals in the past that were like, we'll have conversations about more than like 2 topics.
Yeah.
Or something. Where it's like trying to tease out this, like, expand the things that you're talking about.
Right.
You know? And I'm like, that's wild to me because the way that my brain functions as someone who really is trying to be as affirming as possible, it's like, if you want to talk about trains and that's what you're really into right now, we're going to talk about trains.
Right.
Like, tell me everything you know about trains.
Yeah.
I want to learn. Like,
absolutely.
You know, and then we'll curate our whole experience today around trains.
Absolutely.
Because it sounds great. Like the same friend that we were talking about before, he would go through phases.
The first phase was...
Which one?
Titanic.
Oh my goodness, yes.
The first phase was Titanic.
It was amazing. I learned so much about Titanic.
Same.
I learned so much. Our little friend, he went through a phase of like really being interested in the Titanic, and he could tell you the number of people, the number of passengers, the number of crew,
the number of like split up people too. That like how many women, how many children, how many men,
how many dogs.
Yes,
he knew how many dogs there were because apparently there was like either there was a dog show happening on the ship, or they were like going to a dog show or something. There was how many dogs, how many like how far away the pieces of the ship landed. There was how many of the smokestacks.
I was just about to say that. He like quizzed us on that.
Yeah.
Every week.
It was like, what? There's like 5 smokestacks and 2 of them were fake.
I feel like
they were just. It was something like that where like there were more smokestacks than they needed. It was just for like looks.
And that friend, like, he came into the sessions ready to talk about Titanic. And if you would have dismissed him or told him you could not talk about that during the session, he was not going to participate.
No, absolutely not. He would shut down. I mean, because likewise, if you in this, I mean, and this is not new.
Right.
Like if you came in and you were so excited to tell your best friend about an experience that you had, and then your friend was like, actually, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about something else.
Yeah.
That is so demeaning.
Like if I came home from vacation and I'm like, oh, I'm going to tell you everything about my vacation.
Yeah.
And you looked at me and you're like, don't say a word about your vacation. It's not time for that.
Like how disheartening. What, you know what I'm saying? Like that is a dagger in the heart.
It really is.
So I'm like, these are not things that people can't understand.
And then when individuals can't emotionally regulate after feeling upset because you told them they can't talk about something, it makes sense that there's going to be outbursts or dysregulations or shutdowns. Yeah, all kinds of things.
That friend in particular, he shut down a lot.
We got our passionate voices on about this.
I know, we did. Listen,
sorry, he did shut down a lot.
He would shut down in those moments when when his communication wasn't respected.
Yeah.
And his interests weren't respected. He went through phases. Now we're just going to have a whole podcast about this little friend. Oh, I love him so much. I could talk about him all day long. But he went through another phase where his super interest was a Google, but not the search engine.
No.
Google the number.
Yes.
Because apparently a Google it's a 1 with 100 zeros behind it, I think.
So.
And it was like I had to Google it. I had to Google the Google. And we had this whole conversation and he would laugh. Oh my gosh. He was like, what? He was like, write a Google. And he like wanted to see a Google. And I was like, I genuinely don't think I have enough room on the paper to like write a Google. And then he'd be like, what's a Google times a Google? And I was like, my brain can't comprehend that. I don't have a clue.
Oh my gosh. There were other things he was interested in. Mario for a while. The floor is lava. That was
we went through a what was it? Some fighting game. Punch Out?
Yeah.
Was it called Punch Out?
Something like that.
Something.
He was amazing though.
I love that friend so much. But he is I learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
He is one of those kiddos. I know we've talked about before, and I may have said it on the podcast before, but there are individuals that I've worked with in my career that I'm like, I am better because of you.
Absolutely.
I have grown. I have learned. Like, these are moments in time that I'm like, this is a person who will forever affect every other kid that I influence, and every other patient, every other person that I interact with for the rest of my life, because I have learned so much from this kid.
Right.
And he is one of those kids for me.
Yeah.
That I'm like, I am forever different because of, oh my gosh, I might cry.
Please
because of working with him.
I mean, I started working with him when I was a student.
Yeah, you have more experience with him
than I do. I was getting student hours with him. And so I did his initial evaluation for speech. And it was a big scary time for me because it was my first time doing like that particular test with him or with anyone in person. And so like I was kind of stressed anyway, but it went really well. As I said, he got to like age 21 on some of the vocabulary stuff. Like, it went really well. Ended up like he only needed some help with articulation. So like for me, I was like, oh, this is gonna be an easy report to write. And then I remember getting a lot of pressure from my supervisors, people around me, to write goals for pragmatics. And this was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know, now that I look back on it, I'm like, that's a little disheartening.
Yeah.
To feel like, oh, you can't talk about those things. Because he would be that kiddo that would have had pragmatic goals for, we'll only talk about one topic for this amount of time. We'll turn taking conversations, all this stuff. Which is not going to make him a better member of society just because he can do those things. Yeah. And it's definitely not going to help him meet his overall communication goals. Yeah. We definitely phased those out as I learned, as I grew with him. Yeah. But I think that's important to add, like, those things do happen. And that individual should not have had those goals. Like, he was a great communicator. Yeah. He really was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, like, if he has a particular thing one day that he wants to talk about, give a presentation, he may need some aids, like some support, some practice. But other than that, I know he could handle it. Yeah. He could participate in conversations with peers. He didn't need pragmatic goals.
He was actually a friend that, he was a friend that we considered, not to, not to get too in-depth about this particular individual, but he was a friend who we actually considered, discharging, discharging because he'd met all of his functional goals. Right. And he was able to function in a way that was in his environment at home. He was able to do the things he needed to do in a way that his family felt like, that he and his family felt was successful. Right. And because there's also this notion a lot of the times that, like, just because you have a diagnosis of ADHD or a diagnosis of autism or a diagnosis of whatever,
you need therapy for the rest of your life.
You're going to always need therapy. And that's not true. Yeah. Like, it's not true. There are some people who yes, like, you know, that may be more appropriate. But he was a friend who, like, we had that conversation about discharging because he'd met all of his functional. Yeah. And he was functional. Did he still need help with some things? Sure. But people need help with things. Yes. You know? And so, yeah.
Well, that makes me want to talk about one quick topic of masking.
Oh,
that's one of my favorite things to talk about. A simple definition is it's someone's attempt to portray themselves as neurotypical to meet society's rigid ideas of neurological behavior. And I kind of bring this up because a lot of neurodivergent friends, their brains may work in the way of, like, learned rules. And some follow rules really, really well. Like, to the point of, like, have to follow rules once given. Yeah. This is not all, but some. So, for instance, if we gave those pragmatic goals, they may learn those rules
Yeah.
and even use those rules out in society.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're living their best happy life.
Yeah.
With freedom to speak and communicate what they want.
Yeah.
If anything, it kind of comes robotic and learned of like, oh, I can't talk about that anymore. Or, oh, I spoke, now it's your turn.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I can only say 2 things about this today. I'll have to save all the other things I want to talk about tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want. That's not healthy, like mentally.
No, it's not. I've heard people talk about how like they were taught to like count. They're taught to count like how long before they can respond.
Yeah.
Like someone asks a question and they have to pause and like wait for like a count of 2 before they can respond, because their tendency was to just like respond super, super quick. But then they have to wait. Or counting how many turns they've taken.
Or they're not even listening to the conversation. They're just counting how many turns.
Yeah.
When can I tell my next thing that I want?
Right.
And that's just, it's definitely not neurodivergent affirming. That is the opposite of it. And so people who are neurodivergent are prone to masking. That some want to, even if they don't do it on purpose, it just kind of happens. You start masking to kind of fit better into society. So that's something important. We need to make sure our individuals are not just masking, but they're actually getting the skills that they want or the adaptations that they need to participate in society versus just masking and not being like their true selves.
Yeah. And it's important to like recognize also that the people that you come in contact with, that this may be something that they're experiencing. This may be something that they are going through, because there's a lot of people in the world who are autistic and they're met with like, oh, well, you don't look autistic. You don't act autistic. Like I would have never guessed, those kinds of things. And it's like, that's not, I understand that you probably mean that when you say that in a way, in like a positive way. You probably mean that as like a compliment. Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness, I like never would have guessed. Wow. But it's not. No. Because it's pushing, it has this intonation that not being autistic is better. And so it's important to recognize that the people that you are engaging with could be experiencing this, because just because they don't have symptoms, quote unquote symptoms, when they're around you, doesn't mean that they don't struggle and they don't have challenges existing in a world that is made by the neuromajority.
Right. Which is why like girls in particular go so undiagnosed in the autistic community, because typically speaking, girls tend to be better at masking from a young age. Yeah. Mostly because, and this may be speculation, but it's also just some posts I've seen, but girls are kind of more taught of like, you need to be quiet or polite or wait your turn. And it's a little bit more taught like at an early age, those skills. Whereas a boy, oh, it's a boy. They're just being a boy at an early age where they're rough, rumble, loud, all of these things. Whereas a girl stereotypically has always been
within like
quiet,
American
peaceful,
culture, at least we can talk from.
Yeah. And I've kind of heard that that's kind of where some of that masking happens, is that like girls are more apt to be like want to please at that early age. Yeah. And the social role as a girl kind of overrides their other feelings or their other functions that they have. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah. And so it's really important to understand that individuals may be masking and that we need to understand that and respect it and also let them be them true selves in their comfortable environments. Yeah. And give them the supports they need. And like you said, not just not judge them, not being like, well, I didn't know you're autistic, or are you really autistic? Like, that is so demeaning. Or
absolutely. There are some people that I've heard say things like on social media and stuff that it's like, well, so they say that they're autistic, but I don't really think so. And I'm like, you don't have a clue what their life looks like outside of the short experience that you have with them. And so it's like, it's not it's not your place to like make those kinds of assumptions or make those
And
judgments.
what does it affect you?
Truly. This is one strategy that I have learned recently and I think would be helpful for people to know, like when you're engaging with, especially as as a clinician and as a parent. This is also something to consider. Oftentimes people are fearful of being direct about diagnoses or about differences or whatever. And so, especially when we're working with, especially children,
Right.
because it's like we have to protect children and we don't want them to feel different and we don't want them to feel judged and we don't want them to, go through these, we don't want them to lose any sort of self-confidence or any sort of self-esteem or whatever. And so oftentimes people will hide the fact, well, it's not that they're hiding it necessarily, it's just that they don't talk about the fact that their child is neurodivergent with their child.
Right.
They don't talk about it with their kid. So, but studies have shown that it's actually really helpful. It's very, very helpful to have open, honest discussions with your children, whether you are a parent or whether you are a clinician working with a kid, to teach them about themselves, teach them about their condition, their condition, quote unquote, teaching them about their diagnosis and what that looks like for them. And having this dialogue with them about what are your strengths, what are your what are the things that tend to be a little challenging, what are your triggers. Have these open conversations with them so that they can be more self-aware and they can be better at self-advocating for themselves.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking with like the self-advocacy.
It is huge.
And for example, like I've heard a patient say, I'm autistic, I struggle with this. And I was like, yes.
I love that.
You tell people.
Absolutely.
You stand up for yourself.
Absolutely.
And say, hey, slow down, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
With this.
Yeah.
And that's what kiddos need to be able to do, or anyone who's autistic, or anyone who's neurodivergent, be able to self-advocate for themselves.
That's a very important life skill.
It is.
Because, I mean, imagine, and it's important too because the world is not comprised of the neurodivergent. The world is, like we've been talking about, created, curated, like ruled by the neuromajority. And so, like, for instance, our friend that we were talking about earlier, because he's just a case study of the podcast. But that friend, we worked on some self-advocacy work because there were things that were hard for him. There were triggers that he experienced, and he had a hard time with the emotional regulation piece of when he became frustrated.
Right.
And when he became embarrassed, it was very hard for him to like know what to do next.
Right.
And one of my big fears for him was like, I am fearful that one day you may have a really poor experience with law enforcement. That was always my big fear, is like, what if something happened and he was having, a very intense emotional moment in a store, on the side of the road, like in a public space, and people didn't have a clue what was happening. And then some law enforcement person came up and was like
authoritarian type voice getting on to him.
Right. And like, that's only going to make it worse. And so like, this could end very, very, very badly for him.
Right.
And so it was one of the things I was really interested in trying to help him to become more able to advocate for his needs and tell people like, hey, I'm autistic. This was hard. This thing just happened and it was hard, And so like just being able to have that ability to communicate what's going on with yourself so that you can communicate to the other people.
Right.
Because other people need to know at times.
Do.
Because there are situations when it could be very dangerous in some spaces if people don't know what's going on. Yeah. So it's also important for those people in those spaces with authority to be aware also. Right. It's just another kind of aspect. So self-advocacy is a major, major skill that all kiddos, would benefit from learning, And that's also true. Just another little plug. It's not just true with the neurodivergent people.
All minorities.
It's true for all kids. Like, no matter what you got going on, teaching a kid how to communicate and express their needs and empowering them to communicate their needs is such a powerful tool. It's actually a protective factor against like a lot of mental health conditions.
Yeah.
Because if you can communicate what you need and like have those needs met, then it is protective against like anxiety, depression, self-loathing, a lot of the shame, guilt, a lot of these things.
I will say, as a parent, it is kind of hard because you teach them that self-advocacy. If you start at a young age, when they tell you no, it's pretty hard. But like they're like, no, stop it. And they mean it.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I respect you.
Yeah.
You don't want me to do that.
Yeah.
But you have to respect it in a safe way.
Yeah. We'll do an episode on advocacy.
Yeah.
On self-advocacy.
Yeah. I love
because it's a big thing. And I think it's a major area. This is just me. Adding a little spice to it. But I think it's an area that speech has a bigger role in that they don't feel.
Okay. Look at him calling us out.
I do. I'm like, there's no reason that like speech people are not chomping at the bit and being the forefront members of like, we got to teach these kids to communicate their needs and communicate their like specifically.
But we can't just get them to do more all the time.
Oh my goodness. Don't you be bringing in this little...
I'm so sorry. That
was sarcasm.
Sass and
that was sarcasm.
Okay, back to our topic. So one thing I also wanted to point out is like after extensive use of masking, there is the term autistic burnout.
Ooh,
which can happen.
Tell me about that.
Which is like just the feeling of overwhelm and exhaustion after extended periods of time using like masking skills. So picture an extended time in an environment that does not meet the individual's needs, like the autistic person's needs, the neurodivergent person's needs. It may cause like temporary changes in executive functioning, thinking, and emotion. Extensive periods of autistic burnout can lead to anxiety and depression. And I think that is completely good points.
Yeah.
Being in a place where you feel so unsafe, so unregulated, you're having to like put on the mask. That can be just exhausting.
Yeah.
I'm sure it could be painful. We talked about the eye contact feeling painful for them.
Yeah.
It's not going to be good on their mental health. And we also are going to do a mental health episode.
Yeah.
At some point.
We'll do several.
Yeah. We can talk about that. But it's important to know why. And I think that highlights why neurodiversity affirming movement is so important. Like we need to affirm that these individuals have strengths, that these individuals have worth in who they are versus, hey, you need to put a mask on and like be a part of our majority society.
And respect them.
Yeah.
Provide mutual respect.
Yes.
And again, this is not new.
No.
You, as a person going through life, want respect. You want people to understand what you got going on. You want just the like kindness that someone cares enough to consider that what you're experiencing is real and valid. It's the same thing.
Yeah. This movement is just individuals saying, hey, we're different, but we also want that.
Yeah.
And I love that. Let's go through a couple of words that we need to use new words for.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to learn something here.
Some suggestions.
I'm sure there's
so instead of using low functioning, which is frequently used, we can use words like require significant sensory and communication support. Or you can also just discuss the specific needs that they have. I've learned kind of through my research and looking on social media as well and just being a therapist that it is better sometimes to explain an individual based off of their needs and their differences instead of just saying they're autistic or just saying they're neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Because once again, each one of them are different.
Yeah.
Each individual is different.
Each person's different, yeah.
So just saying low functioning puts them in like this bubble or a box that it doesn't really truly represent them.
Yeah.
So it's better to take the time to explain what either deficits they have, what weaknesses they have.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying low functioning.
And what strengths they have.
Yes, absolutely.
And always include that too.
Absolutely. The other part is high functioning. We could definitely change that to like requires occasional support in this, or this. Once again, being specific, not just putting them in that box of high functioning versus low functioning.
Yeah. And to give a little context to that, there's the getting rid of functioning labels is a big, like we were saying, is a part of this movement. And there's been a lot of pushback on the functioning labels because, especially like high functioning, because using high functioning, oftentimes people who are labeled as like high functioning autistic or high functioning whatever, it feels diminutive to the challenges that they do face. It's like, well, you're saying I'm high functioning, but like I'm still having a hard time in this moment.
Right.
And so like it feels dismissive of the struggle that they are experiencing.
Absolutely.
But then low functioning at this point is oftentimes can be a barrier where it's like, oh, well, they're low functioning, so there's not expectation for improvement, growth, maturity.
Right.
There's not expectation that they can do things.
It puts down like, oh, they'll have no goals in the future.
Right.
Kind of like for the family, it kind of gives away that hope.
Yeah. And yes, exactly. And so they're not super, that's why.
Yes.
That's why.
And on that, I don't think I have this on the list, but that's kind of why we're moving away from using like nonverbal things like that, because we can't put them in that bubble if we don't know. You know what I mean? Like if they're ever going to be verbal, if they may use some sounds, it's just not a fair label.
Yeah. You know who else is nonverbal? A lot of the deaf community. That doesn't mean that because they just don't use verbal words.
And that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on communication, not verbalizations.
It's like, are they any less valuable? Or
no.
Nobody would be like, oh, that deaf person, like, ooh, like they can't do, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
They would never do that.
See, I'm just thinking like when you talked about the low functioning area, like sometimes individuals are put in a box of you're low functioning, you're nonverbal. Like that kind of goes together often in that box.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Parents get that sense and that feeling of like, my kid's never going to talk.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's our job as therapists to explain, where your kid is at, where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are, but also like the goal is to help them communicate with you.
Yeah. You may not speak with words, but that doesn't mean you're not communicating.
Right. Absolutely. So anyway, other one is instead of using obsessions, we can call them hobbies or high interest or interest.
I've heard the term enthusiasms.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. But we don't want to call it obsessions. That sounds a little extreme.
Well, obsessions are pathological.
Yeah.
Like truly. Like if you're talking medically, if you're talking about the literature, obsessions are considered pathological.
Right.
Where it's like that is problematic.
Right.
We're trying to depathologize this kind of terminology.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing we can change is instead of saying someone is rigid or inflexible, we can say they're just difficulty adjusting to new environments. I think we all have difficulty adjusting to new environments. So it's probably best just to not call someone rigid or inflexible. Instead of using selective mutism, we can use situational mutism, as often it's someone may, become more mute in certain situations or environments. And we changed that mostly because like selective implies that it's intentional. And I think that's really important too. We may need to do a whole episode on selective mutism. I would like to learn more about it, or situational mutism, or the term of what has always been called situational mutism, because there's also that myth that is an intentional thing being used. So those are some of the wording that we can change. I have some other definitions, but I think we should do a whole nother episode on those other definitions. So we'll save that for later.
Yeah. One other thing that I think is important to talk about too is talking about language and the differences of language. And when we're communicating about these individuals, you'll hear us use the term autistic a lot. We talk about autistic individuals. It is a common, so we were, at least I know I was, and probably you were too, I would imagine, trained to use person first language,
right?
Which is talking about, instead of saying an autistic person or a diabetic person or an amputee, like you talk about, it's people with autism, people with diabetes, a person who has an amputation, like emphasizing their personhood first,
right?
And the diagnosis as like just a secondary characteristic.
Yeah. So for example, you'd say person with autism.
Right. Exactly. And so that was what we were taught. And that was a push for inclusivity and like what's the word? And it was meant to be like supportive.
Yeah, it had great intentions of like putting the person first. That's what they're trying to focus on.
It's like these
person-centered.
People still have value.
Yes.
You're not less of a person because you're diabetic. You're not less of a person because you're autistic. You're not less of a person because of whatever.
But that also was kind of given into the stigma of autism. If you think about it.
Sure.
We're putting person first because we are so scared of the diagnosis of autism.
Sure. And so there's a push within, I still think that in general, that is widely accepted. Like person first language is still widely accepted. But within the autistic community specifically, a lot of people prefer like diagnosis first, identity first. They call it identity first language. Which is understandable because to hear what I have heard is people talking about it in the sense that being autistic touches every part of their life. They are the person that they are because they are autistic. And they don't feel shame. And like what you were saying, they don't want to feel stigmatized because they have autism. And so they are very happy and proud to be identified as an autistic person. And so we talk about autistic people, autistic individuals with that identity first language because that is what we have understood to be what the autistic community would prefer to be, how they would prefer to be addressed. I'm very open to changing my language if I need to support someone.
And that's something I was going to say is a lot of times in my evaluations, if someone has a diagnosis already, even if it's a kiddo, I will ask if it's an older kiddo who can communicate for themselves and self-advocate for themselves, how they want to be addressed.
Yes.
Or I'll ask the parent how they choose.
Yeah.
Because it's up to them.
Yes.
And so I think to speak for both of us, we're very open to change. Like if this wording was to change tomorrow, send me all the details and we'll learn it.
Shoot, if it changed 5 years ago and we're just behind on the times, let us know.
True. So true.
Like, you know.
So, because I mean, I will say, I bet this podcast doesn't age well. Like,
sure.
The words are going to change.
Sure.
As they continue to change.
Yeah.
So our intent in this podcast is to open up that this is the movement. Explain why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And overall, just respect individuals.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a big point to make.
Absolutely.
Really quickly, though, how do we use neurodiversity affirming movement, like, in therapy?
Well,
very quickly. We've kind of talked about this. We've talked about this in other podcast episodes. We could still
listen. We've been going for a minute. I mean, a minute. We've been going for an hour and almost 20 minutes. And I'm still like, we could still talk about this for another.
Well, let's talk about therapy for like just a little bit. Because we have talked about this. It's basically strengths-based.
Yeah.
Basically.
A lot of it is very similar. And a lot of it is just kind of pulling into the fact of being aware of neurodivergence and like what that could mean for the kiddo. And like my job, especially as an OT person in occupational therapy, my job is not to make a kiddo be normal, quote unquote normal. Absolutely. That is not my job. My job is to help someone be functional and independent with the skills that they have in the environment that they exist.
Yes.
And so oftentimes that means, from the way that it presents in my daily life with kids, is recognizing the needs of the child as an autistic person or as a person with ADHD or, you know, whatever it may be, recognizing their needs. And I make adaptations to the environment. I make adaptations to the activity. I make adaptations to, I make recommendations for adaptations at home to support the kid with their needs. And then I also am very conscious of not placing expectations to be normal,
right?
Quote unquote normal.
Absolutely.
On the kids, where, like, you know, like you said, like, this kid doesn't react the same way to this particular situation, but it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
You know, like, whatever.
Yeah. So to kind of like plug in some of our other episodes. Like if you're joining in with us for the first time or you need a refresher, I would say listen back to the strengths-based episode. Listen back to what is occupational therapy, because that's kind of where you talked a lot about, you know, just the specifics of like sensory needs, things like that, which is all things you would take into consideration.
Yeah.
And then same with listening to the speech therapy episode about like, and I talked about it then, but my goal is to work on communication and to empowering the individual to feel like they can communicate. Not to make people verbal.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. So just kind of highlight that. I do have right here. So I am a clinical director, so I kind of put in some policies in place as well for a clinic. And we have what I've written down is just like a neurodiversity affirming therapeutic approaches. So I kind of want to mention them just so other people can like kind of have that wording or understanding. So one of the concepts we have is to adapt communication methods to accommodate diverse communication styles, including visual supports, alternative communication systems, and clear verbal instructions. So I think that's important, like that we all know to adapt our communication to fit the individual, the patient, how they need it. The second one is to foster sensory aware environment by providing accommodations for sensory sensitivities and considering sensory preferences during therapy sessions. And that's important for speech people too. We need all people. We need to be sensory aware during our sessions. The third one is to encourage autonomy and decision-making within therapy sessions, empowering neurodiverse individuals to have control over their therapy choices.
That part. That's a big one.
It's huge.
Like, and we need to do a whole episode on that too. But please let your clients like help you plan sessions. Like if you go in with this very rigid plan and you are inflexible about what you want to do, then
you're just a low functioning therapist.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just saying, like, if we're gonna call autistic individuals low functioning because they're rigid, inflexible, not gonna listen to others, only gonna talk about what they want to talk about, it's the same with therapists.
It's true. I'm like,
sorry,
get it? Like you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting the
truly
kid up
are
for failure. I'm like, anyway, I could go on a whole rant about like.
Okay, make a note. We're going to talk about autonomy.
Yes.
The other part of half of that is support the development of self-advocacy skills, enabling individuals to express their needs, preferences, and concerns within the therapy setting. Did you know that patients can have concerns?
Oh my goodness.
During their therapy setting.
During the session?
During the session.
Are you kidding?
Yes.
Did you?
I'm not kidding, actually. I said yes, but no, I'm not kidding.
It's wild. It's
that
amazing.
Is wild.
Yeah.
Even, no matter how young they are,
yeah,
they can say they are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And want to stop.
With words or not.
Yes.
We had a whole conversation the other day about, literally yesterday, about a friend who was non-verbally communicating that I do not like what's happening. And
yes,
they need, the clinician was not picking up on it.
Yeah. Also, listen to our underhand episode. Our episode. Okay, the last one here is foster an inclusive and accepting atmosphere where neurodiversity is celebrated and respected. And I think that is also super important. I think as a therapist, like, we should strive to always be a safe, accepting environment for anyone.
Absolutely.
No matter who 100%. Comes into our building, who comes into our office space, who comes into the therapy room, whether it's the parent, the kid, whoever, you become immediately accepting. Yeah. You're on their team. Yeah. As soon as you enter my evaluation room, we're on the same team.
We are on the same team.
I'm here for you. You're here for me.
Yes.
Parents, kids, all the above.
I agree.
That's our little soapbox at the end.
I love. Listen, I really do try to be more like professional and like.
Hey, it's okay if they're still here after an hour and so. They're here for like the.
It's true, the nitty gritty.
The nitty gritty.
I can go on. We can both. We can get passionate.
Yeah.
And it can get a little sharp. Won't say sharp. Things get a little pointy.
We just care a lot. We care a lot. And I don't think people remember that these little tiny humans are people.
Listen, we're going to have to stop. Otherwise, I'm going to start coming out of my chair. Because we have to do a whole episode on autonomy and respecting the autonomy of children.
We really do.
And that one may just be a rant.
Yeah.
There may not be a structure. It may just be like...
We held on to the structure for this episode as long as we could.
We did.
But,
I'm proud of us.
Yeah. Just beware. Love your neurodivergent friends.
Absolutely. Okay, should we do... We'll wrap it up.
I think we should just wrap it up.
We're doing a therapy one of the week.
Okay.
You have to have... Listen, you got one. I'm sure you do.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
What is mine? Oh, darn.
You better be ready.
I did not plan one. Yeah. My therapy win of the week. Oh, there's one. This is an interesting one. Working with a friend yesterday who he's new to us. We've got a language barrier going and between us, and there's some intellectual disability that that makes it challenging for me to understand his communication,
right?
Because there is a language barrier. He speaks Spanish, and I speak very, very little Spanish. It makes me so sad that I really need to learn more. And so it has been a little bit of a struggle to kind of make a connection and kind of open this up. And so, I'm doing a lot of Google Translate. But yesterday we were able to I was able to ascertain that he has an interest in magic.
Okay.
And so one of our OTs, as a part of her schooling, they did a magic camp. And so she's going to bring a magic camp for, children with developmental differences. And so she's going to go get her magic camp stuff and
oh my gosh,
and use that as an opportunity to work towards his goals.
Yeah.
And also foster engagement and participation, and it was fun. It was so fun. I was like, okay, magic. He's interested in magic. We can run with that.
I mean, I feel like magicians probably have really great executive functioning skills and fine motor skills.
Have you seen the close-up magic? Are you kidding?
It blows my mind.
I don't even understand how. I don't know what's happening. It blows my mind how their hands and their bodies can do that.
So yeah, you're gonna have to keep us up to date on this.
I'm excited to see how it goes. This
upcoming magician.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it goes.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
I mean, I'm not going to be doing the magic stuff probably because I have no idea. But our OT who did magic camp,
I love
I'm excited. I'm excited to observe her and see what she does.
That's exciting.
Cool. Yeah,
I'm excited to hear about that. My therapy of the win of the week is I saw a little kiddo this week, and we use AAC, so we use LAMP with him. He's getting really, really good at LAMP. Also, a little humble brag, I'm getting better at LAMP. Yeah. I'm just feeling more confident in it, so I'm just going to throw that out there. Yeah. You have to practice.
LAMP is hard.
A lot.
LAMP is
and you need to, anyway. So we were playing around with it. He really wanted a book, so I just grabbed a random book, but we were we're going to make this work. We're playing with a book, and I didn't realize how interactive this book was, but it was super interactive. It's about making a cake or making cupcakes or something, and you're supposed to tap the eggs, pour the book, shake things, you do all kinds of
that's cool
movements and stuff with it. And this kiddo typically doesn't really imitate actions with me as much, particularly silly sounds. That's not going to happen. I can get an imitation of an action, but not really a silly sound. But two great things happened in that session. One, we worked on turn page during it, which is 2 icons during LAMP, 2 word phrases. He picked it up by the middle of the book and was using it by himself. It's turn page, turn page.
That's awesome.
And we were turning the page. Also, it got to a point where you had to blow on the cupcakes to like blow them off, and like I did it, and then he took the book and like blew on the book, and that's like very uncommon for him.
Yeah.
And then at the end you had to give the cupcakes a kiss. I don't know why, to add the sprinkles. I don't know if they could come up with a better way to do that, but like I had to blow it a kiss, and I was like, I'll do it, but like in my head I'm like, he's not gonna do this.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not like him.
Yeah.
Totally did it. And I was like multiple times, and it was the cutest little blowing a kiss to the book. Anyway, therapy win is he interacted with that book. But disclaimer, we did not do that book from start to finish with no interruptions. So that is important. Got tired of the book like halfway through. Mm-hmm. So I laid the book to the side on the page we were on. He wanted the car. We played with the car for a while, still using lamp, go, stop, all the fun stuff. And then we drove the car back to the book and used the book to help turn the pages.
The car to turn the pages?
Yes, car, turn the pages. Yes, thank you.
Oh.
So that's kind of also an example of
a play-based approach.
But we also still got the book done.
Yeah.
Because, like, I wanted to read through the whole book. Like, I need to know how it finished also.
I mean, honestly, that's, like, sometimes I'm like, I know you don't want to finish it, but I really want to know what happens.
And, like, the book was going so well, but then, like, he very peacefully just, like, I'm kind of done with it.
Yeah.
Fair. He was bored with it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, fun approach to, we finished the book. So, if that is your goal, we finished it. But we did it in a very fun way.
Love that.
So.
Oh, that's such a great therapy win.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you want to see more of us, stay tuned.
Listen to more of us.
You know, yes.
Just semantics is whatever.
That's right. If you want to listen to more of our episodes, stay tuned in because we have more episodes on the horizon. If you want, listen, we've been plugging our Instagram, and I'll just tell you, I'm the one that's in charge of the Instagram, and I'm bad at social media. I haven't posted anything in a long time. So if you want to, maybe it'll be my mission to get better at it.
Yeah.
But our Instagram is the.cotreat. Hopefully we'll have updates on when things are posted and stuff.
Yeah.
Like sessions are
posted.
posted.
Feel free to get on there and send us a message, though.
Yes,
That's
please
a good
do.
Place to
oh my
send
gosh,
us a message.
please send us messages. Let us know what your burning questions are. Let us know if you think we're like the dumbest people in the world and you think everything that we said is wrong. I want to know why, and like let's have that conversation. Let us know what topics you'd be interested in us covering. Yeah.
Okay. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.